My name is Isis, and I offer tutoring in study skills, literature, and writing here on Wyzant. I saw this question asking for help with these essay questions in Greek mythology, and I thought this would be so fun to talk through how I would approach supporting you in writing this essay. So the questions that you're being asked to answer are, what etiological purpose do you think the myth about Arachne and Athena carries? And what does this myth explain the origin of? The second question is, what are the three cultural values used to promote the myth and why? And then lastly, you're asked to give two examples of anthropomorphism, including human traits or attributes. So if you were my student, here's how I'd guide you through this essay question. I would want you to first tell me the story of Arachne and Athena, and I'd give you the hint that the end of the story offers a really straightforward answer to the question about origins and what where does this come from? Where does this thing come from? So I would ask you to go through the reading that you were given to learn the myth and underline anything where it talks about like punishment, consequences, any kind of like mysteries that seem to show up in the individual words. And this is where we're really like drilling down, finding really specific words to back up our argument. But this is like close reading skills that you should have learned in high school English. Um, so for the second question about cultural values, I would actually take a step away from the question. Um, and I'm going to ask you to think of your favorite fairy tale or just some kind of like fable or story that you know inside out and backwards. So maybe you choose like the Tortoise or the Hare or the Three Little Pigs or Cinderella or Little Red Riding Hood, right? And so for the idea of cultural values to kind of get you into the mindset of thinking about cultural values being represented within the story, um, I would ask you, what lessons do these stories teach? Because the oldest myths and fairy tales like these stuck around because they often have some element of keeping people alive to them, some element of survival. And sometimes it's not just like individual people that we're trying to help keep alive, but like um, keeping society going. So, what benefit does a story like The Tortoise and the Hare have to a culture? What kinds of people are we trying to cultivate by teaching our kids about the Three Little Pigs? Whom are we helping to survive by telling the story of Little Red Riding Hood? How do people who model themselves after Cinderella maintain the status quo of society? So I'm gonna like go through those examples really quick. So for the tortoise and the hare, my first example, one value that we might come up with working together is that it's better to take our time and go slowly towards a goal than to waste resources by throwing everything into a project at the start and then having to stop progress entirely to like catch up or like get more resources halfway through. Another could be that overconfidence can make you look like an idiot when it turns out you don't actually have what it takes to complete what you claimed you could do. So, like in general, we kind of want to think about the impact that such a story might have on a culture where the survival of the entire population is so much more dependent on the actions of an individual than ours is. Like we are really distant from we're we have to remind ourselves that the actions of one person can have an impact on society as a whole. And ancient cultures didn't have that kind of distance. One person's actions could ruin an entire town, ruin an entire society. So again, like in the Three Little Pigs, for example, we see the value of like taking one's time and using quality materials. We could also say that the story represents the importance of being willing to help one another, even when someone's need for help seems to be entirely their own fault. And we're like not even going to go into the victim blaming that happens in so many of these stories because so much of it is like this person is being punished because of what they did. The things that happened to them are their own damn fault. And like that's a whole thing that like we can unpack with our therapists and on our own time. Anyway, and just to finish up, like the story of Cinderella teaches us that hard work and selflessness and faith will be rewarded. Um, Little Red Riding Hood is obviously the lesson is like don't talk to strangers, right? So now I would then ask you, what kind of values do you see in the story of Arachne and Athena? For a culture that believes so strongly in the imminence of the gods, the immediacy of the gods, the potential for one's behavior to be instantly rewarded or punished by like the whims and caprices of these all powerful beings, how does this story help keep that society alive? Whom does it protect? Whom does it condemn? Where do we see warnings in this story about how we want members of our society to behave? So then, as far as the last question goes, I don't have your text, so I can't show you exactly. Um, but I couldn't really guide you exactly, but I would want you to talk to me about anthropomorphism, like what it is, why it matters, why it shows up so much in stories. Maybe you've talked about it in your course. Like even nowadays, children's books are written with animals that can talk and do human things, right? So why is that? And I thought of this kind of silly comparison, but like maybe you have like a boomer aunt who like posts those dumb memes on Facebook where it's like the wild geese have so many lessons to teach us, or like be more like wolves. And it's like, okay, well, what lesson is that meme telling us that we ought to learn from these kinds of animals? And that's a form of anthropomorphism, in the sense not that we're attributing human traits to animals, I'm giving you that answer, um, but in the sense that we're drawing those animals' traits out and applying them to people as something desirable and worthy of like modeling ourselves after. So then I would ask you again to go through the reading that you were given to learn the myth, and I would ask you to underline anything where someone is described with like animal or nature related language. We'd talk about the relationship in ancient Greece between humans and gods and animals and nature, kind of like what the hierarchy is. Like where humans fall in their importance, what kinds of divinities the gods of ancient Greece were, um, in relation to humans and animals and so on. And we'd also circle back to those cultural values that we discussed with the second question and talk about what animals represent those cultural values. So in the same way that like your boomer aunt thinks that wild geese have traits that humans ought to mimic, um, we can flip that around and say, okay, well, here are these cultural values that we think um, this story is trying to teach. So, what kinds of animals carry those traits? Um, and then I'd, maybe have you maybe make a meme and send it alongside your essay. So, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this makes sense. I hope that all the questions that I'm offering help you understand better what you're being asked to do in this essay. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Bye for now.